Yeah, no, exactly. This participatory stuff, I'm sorry I overstarted it really. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Thank you ActionAid for hosting us here. I think the measure of the interest of this debate is very clear from many people. And I'm just really delighted that we've managed to invite in people to come and join us who can speak so well on these issues. I think we're all very aware of the run-up to the high-level forum in South Korea. It's going to happen at the end of November in Busan. And certainly in ODI, I've spent the last 6 months or so talking and listening to a lot of people about aid effectiveness, particularly in Africa but elsewhere. And there's a lot of interest and a lot of concern to keep that aid effectiveness agenda going. There's also a lot of interest in the issue of value for money and results, and I think people feel that that's great and that's really important. If we can get more value for money out of the money, more value out of the money that's being spent, that's good news. But I think there also is some concerns. I think that I categorise these in two ways. I think there's concern as to how will this value for money debate actually be implemented. Because there are some ways in which could work which actually would undermine some of the issues of aid effectiveness, and therefore there is a potential tension in the application of this. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Brenda Killen, who has come from the OECD. She is head of the OECD's aid effectiveness division. She's worked in DFID before that. She's worked also in the World Health Organization in helping to turn around the World Health Organization, and she is really leading within the OECD the work on Busan. It's great that you can join us and come and present how you see the path to Busan and how that's working, how people can engage, what you see as the issues coming up on that. I'm also delighted to welcome Liz Ditchburn on my left, who is now the Director in DFID for Value for Money and for Performance. Thank you for coming on the overnight sleeper. Thank you, Brenda, for coming, travelling too as well. Come and join us and talk, particularly obviously with the bilateral aid review results coming out very recently. I think there's a lot of interest in the value for money and what's emerging from that. And I know you'll be very interested to hear from that. At the far end we have Gideon Rabinovich, who has worked for a long time on issues of aid, and he leads the work of the UK Aid Network. I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then finally, at the far end, Claire Melamed, who is the head of the Growth and Equity Programme at ODI, and has worked for the previous 10 years in various NGOs. And finally, of course, I forget to introduce myself. My name is Marcus Emanuel. I am head of the Centre for Aid and Public Expenditure in ODI, which is one of the programmes, and we are one of the things we are doing in the run-up to Busan. We're actually working on the survey results, so the Paris Agenda survey results that are coming out, and doing some analysis with that, with a range of regional think tanks in various developing countries, providing that part of that input. But we also have for a long time we've been tracking the issues of aid effectiveness through that process. So the running order, I'll ask Brenda to start and give us an overview on the high-level forum, then Gideon to come in with give some perspective from the UK Aid Network, then ask Claire to come in from the ODI side, and finally then ask Liz to wrap us up. All the speakers are very keen to ensure we maximise the amount of time for questions, because I think that's what's going to be where the interaction is going. We do have this meeting available running till noon. So we'll be running it for an hour and a half. If you do need to step away before that, please do, but that's the intention, and speakers are available until that time. So we want to use that time in the most productive way possible. I will keep looking at Pauline, let me introduce at the back, who's managed to work out a way to get this video streaming to work, so let us know if it is, and if it's not, we'll might need to pause to keep that going, because I know how interesting and how many people want to engage through that mechanism as well. With those opening remarks, let me turn to Brenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus. And I'm very pleased to see, quite shocked actually to see so many people here this morning. So it's a good sign for Rachel, I thought. Bring up the first slide. What I'm going to go through quickly, because I realise we are pushed for time and we want time for debate, is to look at the two questions. What is aid effectiveness and value for money? Are they divergent? Are they complementary? And also look at how we bring those together on the road to Busan. But I thought I'd start off by just looking at how we communicate about aid, because I think that is a context which affects both of these questions. Next slide, please. It just struck me listening to some of the debates on value for money that it's as if aid is this horrific thing that we waste left, right and centre. And I thought it would be good to kind of step back and look at the big picture. Yeah, even Bill Easterly, who's been very critical of the aid business, says it's healthy to step back and look at the big picture. And I think that as we move towards HLF4, and we're all agreed that we want to get the best impact out of aid, we must be able to say that aid works. We must keep the momentum to improve its effectiveness and value for money. And we must recall that there's a strong demand from developing countries for engagement and also for better quality aid, for better value for money for them. Really, we're at a stage where we know quite a lot about how to do aid more effectively, and so we need to get on and do it. And I think one of the issues where aid effectiveness and value for money really do come together is on accountability, because the accountability of aid relationships is part and parcel of effectiveness. So more effective aid, better results, more value for money. The taxpayers for recipients in developing countries are part of accountability and part of aid effectiveness. Next slide, please. And here's the big picture. If you stand back far enough, everything looks good. The line going up is log of income per capita. The lines coming down are all the indicators that we're targeting on the MDGs. So next slide. We also know that aid effectiveness is important for development impact, that more effective aid helps to achieve development goals. So, for example, evaluations have shown that channeling aid through country systems, that's one of the main aims of the Paris Declaration, strengthens budget processes and sustaining institutions. And Homi Karas, for example, found that after the Asian tsunami in 2004, the aid which was channeled through country systems, the effort started sooner and had greater impact. We also have a lot of evidence on ownership and country leadership, ranging from the work that Brookings has done, taking Korea as an example, strong ownership, very, very strong performance on development, very good use of aid. Or, for example, in Tanzania, which saw a reduction, one district in Tanzania saw a reduction of up to 50% in child deaths between 1997 and 2006, which was linked not so much to how much money was spent in aid, but how it was spent. The links with budget, medium-term expenditure frameworks, using countries' own monitoring and accountability systems were key there. So next slide, please. So moving on to the questions that we're looking at today. Next slide, please. I thought I'd start off by trying to find a definition for value for money, which actually is quite a challenge for me at the moment, because I'm having to advise the translators at the OECD for a big meeting next week on how do you translate value for money into other languages, and it doesn't translate into French, so that's book and led to I'm one listening more, I don't know, something like that. But this is the National Audit Office's definition. Value for money is the optimum combination of whole life cost and quality or fitness of purpose to meet the user's requirement. It can be assessed using the criteria of economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So economy here is minimising the cost of resources used for an activity while having regard to appropriate quality. Efficiency is maximising output for a given input or minimising input for a given output, and in so doing paying due regard to appropriate quality. And then effectiveness is successfully achieving the intended outcomes for an activity. Next slide, please. So in terms of moving towards a better understanding of value for money in development cooperation, it's essential that we combine the ideas of economy, efficiency and effectiveness. There's a myth that value for money is just about efficiency and economy, just about saving money, but it must also be about delivering the objectives of the programme, successful achievement of intended outcomes. So effectiveness is an important part of value for money. I mean, one area where we come up against many differences of views is whether value for money is relevant to development cooperation. Well, yes it is, and of course it is, but also it has some limitations. But I think it's worth underlining here that a value for money approach is difficult in many situations. It's a challenge in public spending, social spending in our own economies. And a lot of the work, in fact, that the OECD does for its own members is about how to develop metrics on qualitative issues, how you measure issues such as value for money or cost effectiveness, where your objectives will take place over the long term, where the economic benefits might not be easy to pin down in advance, areas to do with governance or even the quality of education expenditure would come in here. So there are some limitations, some of which are shared with the rich countries, and I think we do well to learn from approaches there. But some of them are specific to low-income countries because the availability of data is very weak and the quality of statistics is very weak. So if we're interested in value for money, that's a point where we may want to start. Thirdly, there are different approaches in terms of value for money at the global level, at the programme level, or the project. So, for example, at the global level, we might want to look at how aid is being allocated globally. Is it providing maximum value for money? We can use proxy indicators here. DFID's approach of having a percentage target for its spend in low-income countries is an example of this. But one area where value for money analysis on how aid is allocated has usually fallen down is that the view is from the point of view of one donor and not necessarily the entire global picture. And without coordination, of course the aid effectiveness issue, we can have a situation of donor darlings and orphans. At the programme level, we can look at value for money. So this should be more than the sum of individual activities, but look at linkages and possible synergies between different activities and whether the activities together are contributing to an overriding objective, for example, for the country. And then there's value for money at the project level, and it's often at the project level that people envisage value for money. This can be more straightforward, certainly for things like infrastructure projects where we have tools, cost-benefit analysis at a lower level, cost-effectiveness analysis. But as I've already said, it's challenging, and it's challenging across the world to do this in some of the softer sectors. We've made advances in health, calculating appropriate unit costs for different types of interventions, but then we run into problems of whether these are comparable across countries. So obviously for any type of project intervention, a business case does need to be made. We need to think about how we would measure whether we're having an impact, but it is challenging, and I think some thinking on this ahead of Busan is very welcome. Then finally, last but not least, as far as value for money goes, the question of value for money for whom shouldn't be an issue, because of course we should all have shared objectives. If we don't have shared objectives between those who are supposed to be beneficiaries of the aid and those providing the aid, that's a big problem. It's not necessarily a value for money problem though, but it's something to bear in mind that if we don't have shared objectives, then aid effectiveness and value for money are harder to achieve. Next slide, please. So as I've mentioned, there's areas where aid effectiveness is complementary to value for money, and in fact the two terms coincide. So for example, the work on harmonisation under the Paris Declaration speaks directly to efficiency. So work to reduce transaction costs, work to improve the quality of developing countries' own systems, which improves the efficiency of their own expenditure. Those are all value for money objectives. Then secondly, on effectiveness, the focus of the Paris Declaration on ownership and alignment, it's delivering essential building blocks for long-term sustainability of aid and to contribute to the achievement of long-term objectives of development assistance. So here there really are synergies between the Paris Declaration, and I think this is something we should seek to build on. But as I've said before, it's always difficult to make a value for money assessment. So this goes beyond developing countries. Next slide, please. So some pitfalls, there are always pitfalls that we need to be aware of. Firstly, avoiding the tyranny of indicators. There is a natural tendency, particularly when we need to prove that we've ticked all the boxes and done everything we can to minimise risk, to try and measure absolutely everything. But the more indicators we have, the more measurement activities we have, these can and often do lead to unnecessary transactions costs, especially for developing countries with weak, limited capacity in terms of human resources. So we need to avoid being driven by the indicators and being aware of why are we using the indicators and how are these helping us deliver value for money, which ultimately means delivering our development objectives. Secondly, there's a danger that there's a bias against the so-called soft sectors, which are actually the difficult things, governance in particular. It's easy to measure output from building infrastructure, but less easy when we're working with institutional and political processes. So it's important to be aware that there's an inbuilt bias in many approaches to avoid those sectors and just really invest in things where it's easy to measure outcomes. Thirdly, there are different cultural values and expectations around value for money. I've already mentioned that it doesn't translate into other languages. For some people, when you say value for money, they automatically think you mean contracting out to the private sector. Other people think the value for money means saving costs. That's the only objective. I think here is an area where if we can take ownership, those of us who are interested in maximising development impact, come up with a definition which is widely accepted by the time we get to Busan, so that we have a definition for value for money that works for development. I think that's an important objective for Busan. Fourthly, value for money, if it's not understood or implemented properly, it can disregard the different political cycles in partner countries. So when value for money becomes a political imperative in a donor political cycle, they may be demanding measurement and assessment at times that aren't appropriate for partner countries. And then finally, in taking this forward, for value for money and aid effectiveness to come together, domestic accountability needs to be at the heart of any value for money effort. We need to be building on and building up developing countries' own accountability structures. That means using their parliaments, their national audit institutions, their giving the information, being transparent with countries' executives, so that the views of value for money coincide. Next slide, please. So finally, just some comments about how we get to Busan and where value for money and aid effectiveness and Paris Declaration can be brought together. Next slide. The objectives of HLF4, and it's come at the end of the experiment really, of the Paris Declaration. We set up some targets and we took lots of readings of what was going on over the last 5 years. So we can draw conclusions on the Paris and Accra process and reaffirm commitments to aid effectiveness where the evidence shows us that that is the right thing to do. There's also a strong demand to look at aid in the broader development context, so not making aid perfect in and of itself, but looking at how aid interacts with other forms of finance and resources for development, whether that is South-South cooperation or domestic tax revenue, that aid is not exogenous. And then HLF4 will draw on the evidence that is being generated by the monitoring survey, the evaluation, many other work streams that will feed into Busan to look at the aid quality framework for the future. If we decide that the experience of monitoring, of having an aid quality framework has been valuable and worthwhile, then what should we be looking at in future? What are the key things to guide aid impact? Next slide, please. So in terms of an expected outcome, we are hoping for an outcome which can include all development stakeholders. So that includes trying to get a political level statement that even countries like China can sign up to. We know that there will be a focus on results, transparency and accountability even before we see the results of the survey and the evaluation. This is the feedback we're getting from donors and also from developing countries transparency in particular is important. We expect to see a treatment of aid as part of a bigger picture for development. So recognition of its role, and also recognition that actually we can work more cleverly with aid. We can get more out of aid and leverage change elsewhere. And all the feedback that we're receiving is that having monitoring and having country-based monitoring is valued, and it has meant that this process has had some impact. So we're expecting there to be a call for some kind of country-based monitoring going forward. Next slide, please. So just picking up on one of the major things which will be discussed in Busan, and that's the results agenda. Results very closely linked to value for money, and we're really challenged to make sure that the results agenda can work for development results. I realise I'm running out of time here, so I'll speed up a bit. But we had a workshop in Paris at the beginning of February with a full range of people who generate, use, need results of aid. And there's a remarkable convergence of view that what we have now is not fit for purpose, that we have a prolific number of systems generating all sorts of different data that don't necessarily, that may meet one particular one-off need, but not the needs of everyone involved in delivering public expenditure, delivering aid. Actually, this is then a value for money issue. So the system needs overhauling, cumbersome reporting systems, uncoordinated data, not fulfilling the needs of information, and also undermining local ownership, local capacity. I mentioned weak statistics earlier on. The processes we have now are not supporting sustainable development. So next slide, please. What came out of that process, and this is something that we want to take to the senior level meeting of the DAC in April. Are the donors willing to go to Busan, having agreed to make sure that the results agenda is working and working for development? Key things here are to support and use common and rigorous long-term data sources that meet the needs of multiple parties. Really important to invest more in strengthening country systems for data collection and analysis. Failures on results, being able to come up with results today, and it's appalling that we can't come up with more results for a $120 billion a year industry. And failure there is in large part due to weak local statistical capacity. We don't know what's happening. And then finally, to end on the note that I started with, improving communication is crucial to support honest and realistic objectives, and also enable us to take risk, and take risk in a way where we do it with our taxpayers or with the those receiving the aid. So something that I hope we can see in Busan is a commitment to a more honest and informed and realistic discussion about development, and that's crucial for value for money, for aid effectiveness, for results for development. Thank you.
Thank you very much.